I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, or the primary parents, often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their roles. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men, whether you work full-time, part-time, or devote all your time to your family. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who are lead dads and to welcome other dads who want to learn more from them. Today, my guest is Gary Barker. Gary is a leading global voice in engaging men and boys in advancing gender equality and creating a positive view of masculinity. He is the CEO and founder of Equimundo, which has worked for 20 years in more than 40 countries, starting in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He's also the founder of MenCare, a global campaign working in 50 countries to promote men's involvement as caregivers. Gary co-created and leads the International Men and Gender Equality Survey, the acronym IMAGES, the largest ever survey of men's attitudes and behaviors related to violence, fatherhood, and gender equality. He's also the co-author of the 2015 and 2017 State of the World's Father Reports. Gary, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks for having me. Love to talk about this stuff.
I know this, that in addition to being a leading voice in the MenCare movement, MenCare space, you are also an OG lead dad. Tell us about this. Tell us about your time in Chicago, what you're doing there, and how you took on this role as lead dad with your wife and daughter when you were in Chicago.
Yeah. So my important detail that my wife's Brazilian. She graciously agreed to, move her to that cold weather when I worked on my PhD in child development, which is a great space to talk about fatherhood in terms of, often our invisibility as fathers in the child development field and literature and all of that, but also a great space just like, how am I stepping into this role of being a father in those, long, cold winters in Chicago and not traveling too much and, living in our small graduate student apartment, said, yes, let's become parents. This, sounded like a good idea. And it was desired and planned. And what we didn't really think as much about is, in all the excitement of making a child, now there's a lot of caregiving that comes with it. And I had been learning, all this, the theory of how small humans come into the world and interact with their caregivers and what good caregivers should do. And then there's that cold winter day when the child comes your way and you're like, oh my God, I'm not prepared for this. And
I love this. This is classic graduate school. This is theory versus practice.
Theory versus practice. Yeah. Oh my God. And so, who knew how to change, a baby girl? You went, what? That's not in any of the textbooks or the case studies. And the panic in the pit of your stomach of, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And you're, my dear mom needing to kind of leave us behind and going, oh my God, we barely have any, social network here. What now?
Yeah.
Combined with that, my wife had taken, she's both a therapist and a expert in public health. She was working at one of Chicago's community health centers as the lead therapist. And she had a full-time job and I had a part-time job, and she was the main breadwinner. And she reminded me that Brazil has 5 months paid maternity leave and that she had started a job that gave her, it was something like 14 weeks partially paid as disability leave. And she said, well, this backward country that calls pregnancy a disability and has kind of, very little leave. So what are we, you, my dear husband, going to do? So a couple of days a week, I was the full hands-on caregiver. We had a nanny who gradually took over, kind of stepped in a few, after kind of 4 or 5 months and was there for 3 days a week. And I was the hands-on caregiver and often the coordinator of the nanny care as well. So
that's a lead dad role right there. You're
all those roles for, the year before we moved back to Brazil, where it's much easier to have lots of other care around. I was the main caregiver.
What month was your daughter born?
She was born in December.
Oh, wow. Because I went to graduate school as well in Chicago. And I remember saying there are 2 seasons in Chicago. There's winter and construction. So just as you said,
This is winter.
born in December. And so you've got a good like 5 months of frigid weather, but the small human can't move. The small human doesn't need to go like this, but you're trying to be a graduate student. You're trying to do your work. Your wife is out of the house. She's, at the hospital. What was it like? What do you, when you look back and we're going to go into your work in the fatherhood space and the MenCare space, but what lessons did you take from that you didn't?
I mean, I thank you for asking. I think the first part was like this amazing giving up of my own expectations and giving up that illusion that you sort of control your destiny, that you started a day off thinking, this day I have these 3 articles to read and I need to be working on this piece of a paper. And I also was a part-time researcher on a project and I was going to get this one interview done for that study I was involved in. And the day came with my daughter needing X or Y. And I went, oh, suddenly there was 15 minutes for me to do what I thought was going to be 3 hours of work when she was napping. And then you realize, well, no, because when she's napping, you're preparing for the next meal. You're cleaning all the stuff that has, happened to you and to the floor and to the things she's been wearing. And to be minimally ready, I might even need to sleep because she slept, in very unevenly until she was, 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So there was also the desire of going, oh my God, I do have an hour now to myself. But if I don't sleep, I can't function when she wakes up in an hour. So it was just this moment of like how to let go and realize, oh, I didn't, I kind of thought she was this lovely little package that she'd wake up in those prescribed moments and you'd feed her in those prescribed moments. The amount of stuff that would come out to the diaper would be prescribed amounts, right? That everything was like controllable. And at the end, there was this lesson of just going, I'm going to see what happens this week. I don't know. And today, I don't know what's going to happen, but I might get this reading done, but it might happen at 11 at night. And I do think there's a humility and then a certain moment of just, one, you try to fight back on that and get her to fit a schedule that you thought you could make. And then there's a moment of just letting go with that and going, this is kind of cool. It's a different wavelength. It's a different language. I'm used to being a scientist and now I'm being an ad hoc artist trying to make it up on the fly. And it was fun. And also, I had this deep, deep empathy for what moms go through all the time. And remembering my mother, who was mostly a stay-at-home mom for 3 of us, she maybe didn't say these words, but just like the boredom and isolation of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
It can get, I had not experienced many 8-hour days where I didn't speak with another adult, right? It's weird.
So there weren't like other graduate students who had kids that you could, no, right?
You don't have to finish that sentence.
Fair enough. I remember so well because, when I wrote my first book, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And I think this is fine. This is easy because like my wife would go to bed early because she was tired because she was pregnant and I'd get a lot of work done. And then I sold the second book when she was pregnant with our second daughter. And I said, oh, this is going to be easy. And of course it wasn't because now I already had a daughter and the second one didn't sleep the way the first one did. And I have this distinct memory of probably my favorite chapter in the second book. I essentially wrote it in my mind doing laps in my kitchen at like 2 a.m. I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do here? And then like trying to remember it all. And I was like this manic state. So after you hightail it out at Chicago, you go back to Brazil, but talk to me about, how Equimundo started. It used to be known as Promundo, but how it started, but also how, you developed this interest in working in the MenCare space and working with, masculinity and positive images of men and fatherhood. How did that come about as an interest to you?
Yeah. I would say if you had those vocational tests that they gave us back in 6th and 7th grade, where you think about your profession, right? There was not a box on that test that was, be a gender equality advocate and work on healthy masculinities. It was not a job category.
You had to scroll, you had to flip to the next page.
It was a lot of pages before you got to that one. It was down there past a lot of other noble professions that not many people got there to that last page. It was what, I saw growing up. And then, inspired by a lot of women who have been leading this field for so long. So among those things I saw were a shooting in my high school in Houston, Texas, a young man with his stepfather's gun. And I won't go into details of that, but it is, this was the late 70s, we started counting mass shootings and school shootings in the early 80s. This was part of it. We've had this forever in the US. And very kind of keenly aware of the versions of manhood that played out in the midst of all that. A couple of years later, freshman year, big public university in Texas, 5 young men take a drunk young woman back to their dorm room in my dorm and had, non-consensual sex with her in my dorm, did close to nothing about it. I ended up writing about this stuff, including abortion activism and gun control in same said big state university in Texas. Got some threats when I stepped out I was doing journalism as my undergrad, getting some threats of, this is what we're going to do to you, managing editor Barker, when we see you drive out from the newspaper in the evening. And, kind of finding a conversation about manhood in women's rights activists, in women's rights activists. Ended up working in Latin America on issues related to violence and violence prevention, and with a lot of amazing women who were creating a space of this work needs men. The prevention of violence is men's violence, and we need men to be part of that. And we need men to be part of the overall gender equality equation. And then my doctorate came in the middle of that there's the theory of what do men have to do with raising children. And then there's the lived experience of, human male, here's a human child.
Right.
Here, the adult, care for this one. Do it well, because it's everything that matters to you right now.
Or not even do it well, just do it. Do it, with paying attention. Nobody's an expert. Nobody comes out as an expert,
Well, that's the masculinity part of it, right? That we have to not only do it, but do it well, right? So all those things combined to say, my doctoral dissertation was looking at young men, both in Chicago and in Rio de Janeiro, who lived in highly violent and where violent versions of manhood, whether gang related or police for the, kind of the two leading ones, just captured so many hearts and minds of young men. And I looked at young men who found ways to stay out of those, to find healthy versions of masculinity. Many of them were young involved fathers, not all, but found fatherhood as one way out, connections to others, a female partner, a grandmother, an identity that was different from carrying weapons and threatening others to being artistic or musical or being good at school or being involved in a religion that kind of pulled you out of it, multiple stuff. But that was the framing of creating the organization to say, let's flip the equation around and say, not kind of why do men become violent or unequal, but to say, what are the factors that we know allow men to be nonviolent and caring? Yep. And that
what were some of those, when you think of those factors sort of, that really stick out over 20 years in 40 countries? Yeah, what are those main factors?
Men who are allowed to be their caring selves. And sometimes that was in the context of being a young father without wanting to. So a lot of teen dads who didn't plan for it, but who can find a way to be connected, find that it shifts, the same thing that we do as dads, when kind of your life view, your worldview is flipped when you take that on. Involved fatherhood is one of those. Somebody in their caregiving environment, often it was not a dad, because many of the dads were away or imprisoned or died early. Often a female family member who said, you're not going that way. We're keeping you. You may have seen your father use violence. You may have seen other men around you. We're keeping you here. That's not what manhood is about. Peer groups made a huge amount. Did you end up in a peer group that were mostly gang connected or involved in violence? Or did you find, a peer group that said, no, we're into being being good for our neighborhoods, and we do sports or we do music, or we do something that says we don't want to go down that pathway. Guys who had lost brothers or cousins and had seen somebody else go to prison before the age of 20, or had lost them because they'd been killed in gang violence or police violence, saying, oh my God, I'm panicked about this, and I'm okay to say that, and I want to do something else. All those were the factors that allowed, and I looked at, young men whose brothers or cousins had been gang involved. So it was kind of, asking the question, why some and others not? So yeah, those were the factors.
When I listen to that, is the through line something along the lines of they had a sense beyond themselves, that there was something, more than just them, that they weren't alone in the world, be it fatherhood, be it, you said, talked about theater, the arts, you talked about a grandma or mom who cared, you talked about, I'm going to sort of not put words in your mouth, but you lost a brother. Well, you don't want to do that to your mom or dad and have them lose another one. Is that sense of, not being alone in the world and there being
Yeah,
other
I think
things?
that was a huge one of kind of stepping back from that life doesn't just happen to me, but also feeling a sense of
Right. So
agency,
it's an
right?
agency. Yeah.
So I think one is that agency part, but the other is, relationships, right? To acknowledge that that I'm a relational being. That's a word, and that's an expression I'm using that they didn't use. But yeah, somebody around me would suffer if I went down that path.
Yeah.
And somebody who I knew cared deeply about me, and who I cared deeply about them. And some of the guys would even say that, right? And sometimes it was a father. It was more often women, just because women in low income settings, both in Brazil and the U.S., are often the ones holding households together. But it was often, if this happens to me, this is what it will mean to my grandmother, my mother, the aunt who has raised me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, kind of helping boys have our sense of self as we're connected to others who have cared for us and who continue to care about us and who we care about is kind of a muscle that we need to help boys flex. And, often we spend a lot of energy literally beating that out of boys.
Mm-hmm. When you think about, we said at the top, Equimundo starts in Brazil, spreads to 39 other countries in which it does work. When you think of the different perceptions of men as fathers and providers and caregivers, how does what countries stick out to you as either having a particularly positive view of men as fathers, providers, and caregivers, or the opposite, having a view that really needs a lot of challenging, hopefully a lot of updating for it to be more positive?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I mean, there's probably more variation like within a given country than there is across countries, right? Of just,
Okay.
I mean, one commonality, one of the projects we did in Brazil, for example, folks might look at a favela, low income areas and urban areas in Brazil and say, wow, this is, it's full of violent men and there's lots of absent men, which is partly true. But at the same time, we did some projects where we put phones or cameras in children's hands and said, take pictures of men doing care, as however you define care. And we had no shortage of photos. Children could see men all the time doing stuff that the middle class world, and particularly a white majority world, might look and say, no, those men don't do it. They must be lots of absent fathers, and say there might be absent biological fathers, but there's no shortage of men doing hands-on care of children all the time, from playing to bathing to feeding. So one would be to say there's a lot that the kind of reboot that needs to be done in some parts of the world. And I would say we've got a similar bias toward low-income families of color in the US.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think of them as father-absent places where, men just aren't doing their part. But if we flip it around and look closely, there's men doing a huge amount of hands-on care of children in very positive ways. So I just, give two contrasts or similarities between the US and elsewhere. I mean, there's just about everywhere we've looked. So you mentioned our images study that's been in nearly 50 countries. Just about everywhere we look, there is a sense that fatherhood is a positive thing. It is good for men to exert some role in their children's lives. Some of that's more just the moral. He sees the children for, an hour in the evening, and he's the disciplinary force. But in many settings, it is valued for the affection part of it as well. That seems pretty universal. The big difference is, and where there's big cultural gaps, is whether is it seen that the hands-on care of children, the cleaning, the bathing, the diaper changing, the being emotionally responsive to your child. There's lots of parts of the world that's not seen as something men should do.
Mhm.
That might be some parts of sub-Saharan Africa. There's parts of Southern Europe, I would say that can be common as well. There's some parts of Asia where men's physical connection and their affection is quite high, but they don't think that, or the norms, it's not them as individuals, the norms don't propose that they do the hands-on cleaning and bathing and such, that's women's work. But close physical affection and emotional affection is considered part of, the average father's repertoire. So, and then there's a few countries who kind of take, yes, men should do their share of it, and we believe in the close affectionate relationships. And I think that's what, a lot of men in the US are after. I think that's what the Scandinavians and Canada and some other parts of the world have tried to promote, right? Of how to say it's all the above. And in fact, when we finish that phrase, it means that a parent is a parent and it matters far less, are they male or female? I guess that's what I would go with as a taxonomy of kind of how we see this across the world.
Now, I had a dad reach out to me last week from India who started a fathering group called something like Cool Dads in India. But what he was trying to do is just get sort of upper middle class Indian dads to sort of go to the park with their kids, play with their kids, go to the sports with their kids, as opposed to leaving that to caregivers or to moms when the men were fully capable of going and playing soccer with the kids. When you think about the 20 years you've been at 20 years plus that you've been at this, where's the trend line? Is it moving in a positive direction, or is it much more complicated than that?
Yeah, I wish that Martin Luther King phrase of the moral arc bends in the right direction, but it's not what I'm butchering that quote, but it's not a straight line, but it bends in the right direction, I believe, if that's the close version of it. I do think, the weight of the women's equality movement and changing laws and policies and workplaces so that women, we haven't achieved equality there, but we believe in that equality. We've made something like it happen in schools. And all the world's governments have some laws in place saying that men and women should be equal, and the devil's in the details, obviously. So I think, one trend is that's there. And then what's up with men? We're, according to our analysis of the data from middle income countries, we're 90 plus years away from hands-on care equality. That is, who does what at home.
Wow.
So there's change happening, but it's just far too slow. That was data before COVID. COVID was clearly, a huge, as they call those in legal contracts, act of God, right? The force majeure.
Force majeure, yeah.
That, just made men around the world be present, at least they were at home. Whether we did more hands-on care work is another question, but most data says we have. And some of us will probably keep doing more of that because of this force majeure. Now, women continue to do more as we ask them, because everybody was doing more, and we started off in unequal, but we've never had a kick or a nudge or a push as big as COVID to get more men to do more care work.
But it also, as you know, the company of dads, the idea for the company of dads came out of COVID, of all being together and being together, but also being apart. But it also, I think, and I was always very involved with dad, but I think about this time where people couldn't really fib about what they were doing anymore. If you were, obviously plenty of frontline workers were out there, but if you were, if the world essentially pauses and you're at home, you can't really tell your partner or your wife, hey, I'm really busy, I'm doing this. You say, well, so am I. And and I don't know, I'm by disposition an optimistic guy, so I'm hoping it continues forward. But what do you think helps the lines go, continuing that trend where it doesn't take 90 years for us in middle income countries to get there? What is it? Is it support from government? Is it support from the workplace? Is it, we also have, short memories. We can pretty quickly, if we're not careful, get back into our old routine.
Yeah, good point. I think it's all the above. It certainly matters that there's a cultural shift. And I think, what you're doing with Company of Dads is both trying to drive the cultural shift, and you're part of the cultural shift, right? You represent it, right? That kind of life. And as I've heard you talk about it, sort of life led you to this path of this made sense for your household. And that was what led me to be, the stay-at-home dad for my daughters, or for at least part-time stay-at-home dad for her first year of life. And so, I think we do need the cultural shift that involves lots of us speaking out about it, making it normal, trying to get, TV and media and cultural, icons to say, this is a normal thing, do it, it's good, we all benefit when it happens. So I think it's the cultural part that's got to keep turning up that volume. And then we definitely need the policies that support. We've seen again and again how men's good intentions to take parental leave, right, are, they hit a wall when men look at, well, I don't think other men in my workplace do this because, they don't consider us serious workers. We're not considered serious hustlers if we take all those full days of leave.
Yeah.
So as we've asked men, why don't, if your company offers, or if your state offers, or if you live in a country that offers, why don't you take the same full number of days that women take? The reasons are always about, I didn't think it was, it would look good on my career. I was worried of what my career would do. So clearly workplaces need to be in there full on saying everybody's a caregiver, a part-time caregiver and a part-time worker. That's normal. We don't care male, female, non-binary. That's, the same for all of us. Policies that say, you shouldn't have to make trade-offs of whose work ends up being curtailed. We should be able to decide that as a household. We want that to be just. We need, subsidized childcare that goes with it. So it's, we don't have to make those hard calculations of, oh, should one of us not be working because it's so expensive to have childcare? So clearly, getting the workplace and our governments as taxpayers to cover, a cost of a public good, which is children being well cared for. And then, I think starting early at the, what we'll call the gender divide or the gender binary, which is we keep making this idea that care is feminine and conquering and achieving and producing is masculine. We've done a little bit of shifting on the achieving, conquering. It can be feminine too, but the care work is still considered feminine. Look at 90+% of kindergarten teachers and care workers, whether that's childcare or adult care workers. It is still, considered feminine. So I think we've got that big shift to get over as well, to say care is human. We all have to do it. It's not only we have to do it, it brings us life and well-being. I love to interview occasionally or hear from male care workers who talk about, man, I could have been a security guard at store X. Nothing against security guards. We need them some places. But who said, man, I get to hang out with young kids. I get the immediate joy and affection. It's just like, what a job that, or elder care as well, right? Hearing like, I'm connected in their lives.
And you're really helping. You're really making a difference.
Really
Again, not that security guards don't help make a difference, but you're really like, you are that person. Yeah.
I mean, job satisfaction of just going, look at this. So anyway, I think all those cultural, workplace, policy, all the above.
One of the things you worked on recently was a study with the Gina Davis Institute that looked at how men as caregivers were portrayed in film and TV, and how some parts of that study are positive and good. Some parts show that we still have a lot of work. Talk a bit about that study and what it showed and how perhaps changing those views of caregivers, men as caregivers, might help us more broadly.
Yeah, we've been inspired by Gina Davis and the Institute's work for 8-10 years, and I had the chance to be on a panel when they were presenting some of their data about women and how women were portrayed in kind of the most watched TV and film in the U.S. And struck by Gina Davis's comment, kind of obvious, that our lives are produced by what we see in media, among many other things. And her message that if she can see it, she can be it, and having a career where she wanted to live empowered women because other women told her just how important that was. And I kept thinking, oh my God, we need an equivalent kind of, a different but equivalent version of men seeing that we can be different, given social permission to be different, better people, taking the good things we already do and getting better at other ones. And so we've now done 3 studies with them on kind of how manhood is presented. And this most recent one was about fatherhood. The good news part of the story is looking at the most watched TV over the last 10 years. there's just about equal presentations of men as caregivers as there are women as caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
So the good thing is that men are seen there. They're on the screen doing care work nearly as often as women do. Now, it's not a surprise that there's not a lot of...
They're the bumbling dad. They're the
there
bumbling,
you go. It's the how. It's the how. And you got the, there's the kicker, or the punchline, which is how our dads presented, right? I mean, first off, to finish the first headline, caregiving as a thing presented in Hollywood is really not the central story that, I think we miss a lot of opportunities to tell deeper stories about care and to make care and caregiving like more of Hollywood stories. So one is just among main leading characters, caregiving is just not usual, it's not that big of a thing in storytelling in Hollywood. Now, the other part is that, so great, men are shown on screen doing what? And you just hinted at what is it? We're bumbling, we're incompetent. We called it the apprentice dad, always learning, always needs a female partner to teach him, which, hey, granted, that's true for a lot of guys because we haven't learned it, but it's not presented in kind of just as many of us, or as my partner would have said, she didn't know how to do the caregiving either until she did it, right? We're all learning. So like to not, that trope was maybe funny, like at a couple of, 10 years ago. Now it's kind of time to update it. And the other is just the emotional absence, right? Of just how much dads were not shown being the emotional support, having deeper conversations with their kids, able to talk about, what is emotionally concerning their children, so that, we actually know that we're more than just Uber dads. I mean, Uber, like Uber driver dads, that we're more than just like picking up, not like Uber, like great, but Uber as in just, we can get the task done, and just keep our straight, non-emotional face. So I think the emotional one is the one that concerns me the most, because I think that's where dads find their, their stake in caregiving. It's the, as particularly as we look at a world in, coming out of we're not even out of it, right? If we look at the economic instability we're in, a moment, of a quite big conflict happening in the center of Europe, all the stuff that's happening in our political upheaval in this country, it is a moment where it's all hands on deck to support each other around anxiety and being our better selves. And I just want to, I want to see men seeing versions of themselves, being deeply caring, connected, emotional, heart-opened guys, connecting and caregiving. And that seems to be missing, with some amazing, exceptions of shows out there who do it well.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously one of my passions to sort of change the narrative here. A couple of podcasts ago, I talked to a woman named Dana Susskind, a great surgeon, actually at the University of Chicago, who just wrote a book called Parent Nation. And in it, she tells the story of her first husband, who actually died tragically trying to saving the lives of two kids who were drowning. But with his own three kids, he was a very involved father, and as well as being a famous surgeon, like the head of surgery at the University of Chicago Hospital. But he would put in his diary back then, he put a line that said, it wasn't this, essentially like, super important, not to be moved, triple top secret meeting with an equally stupendous doctor at the University of Chicago. And so everyone was afraid of him. So they didn't do anything. And then one day, one of his, residents who's learning from him sees him on the field watching one of his children play a sport. And guy cheekily comes up to him and says, "Is this the super top secret, not to be moved meeting?" And he's sort of shocked. This famous surgeon is shocked. But then they have that inside joke. And I think we have come to a point where if in our work calendar we put going to a child's graduation, whatever grade it is, kindergarten, 7th grade, 12th, whatever, going to child's sporting event or artistic performance, that would be fine. But in my heart of hearts, I would love it for a moment where we could say, an hour block here or 90-minute block here, need to take walk with daughter, have conversation, getting ice cream. And people would say, oh, okay, he's a human. Yeah. He's not just a worker. He is a human. And knowing that we'd have these, you hire people, you trust people that they're going to get the job done. And, parenting doesn't just happen, before 9 o'clock and after 6 o'clock at night, nor does it just happen if we had paid parental leave. That would be a wonderful place to start. But what happens after those first couple of months? Like, it doesn't, it's not like it suddenly gets super easy. Like, oh, good. we hit the 6-month mark. It shouldn't be a problem.
Off on your own, small human, and conquer the world. Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a couple of examples. Again, we look at, usually Western European nations that have good social welfare systems because they've typically tried some of this, right? The Swedish parental leave allows you to take of those days that's almost 2 years for a couple in total, up until your child is 12. So essentially you take the equivalent of your social security number, and when you take those days leave, you simply push them in there, and you can take those, X amount when your child's, an infant, you can take, and you keep track of how many of those days you have, and you can use them up until the child is 12. And, it's taken them a couple of decades to get this built into the way that one operates, but that, you have these days. And clearly there's similar pressures on Swedish men and women to, fill in the job, and employers will complain about it because, they have stuff to get done that's important, and it can involve running planes and trains and carrying out surgery and, fixing your TV and all that stuff that we need done every day. But you build it in, you just bake it into, we all need this time. The Dutch, I don't remember the exact details of it, but they've got, if you've got children, and I can't remember what the cutoff is, if it's 12, they have Wednesday afternoons and I believe Friday afternoons that are kind of family time. And so again, it kind of institutionalized that if I'm a parent, I get to leave work and it's considered that I'm off. So you've sort of a built-in part-time, and I think it makes their work week, 35 hours or something. And again, ways that make it normal.
Yeah.
And so you will know that, that Wednesday afternoon and the Friday afternoons are when parents may be out shopping with kids or doing sports or doing outings, or simply just like a breather in the middle of the week to do care work. And then, again, it doesn't have to be, I have to be, the brave, clever surgeon to find a time in my, I love that. It's like surgically finding time in my schedule.
Exactly.
Right. Versus we all just make it normal. So I agree with you.
What do you think about, the last time you did a State of the Father survey was 2017. And if you were to redo that survey today, in 2022, or do it for next year, what are some of the questions that you would really want to ask, and some of the answers that you'd really want to get now versus what you learned back then?
We actually, my bio's a little out of date there. We did one in 19 and one in 21 as well. The 19 one involved surveys in 13 countries. And there we were looking a lot about men's take-up of time, that is how much time they spent, and their take-up of leave, and comparing countries that had generous leave policies and countries like the US that have no national level leave, but we've got lots of individual companies and state level stuff. And looked really about kind of men's care of children, and particularly their biological children or children they had adopted. One thing we're going to do the next round is to look at, multiple kinds of care. One is just the wake up call in the US and globally of how much we're either, if you want to call us the sandwich generation, or I liked it how Ai-jen Poo put it, we're the panini generation, because a sandwich sounds fluffy and nice. And
right.
we're actually being
panini is melted and squished, a lot of pressure and
our guts are spilling out, trying to do it all. So one is,
but when you think about that 21 survey, obviously, COVID, everything, world in disruption. Go from there to what you're about to say. What did you get there that you wanted?
Measuring that disruption. Another piece, and you were talking about this earlier as well. What we found in the 20, so that was 2019, 2021, we did caregiving during COVID. And what did we find? One, that other surveys finding as well, women were already doing more. They began to do more, but men stepped up. We did a lot more hours. So one is, we're curious, did that continue? And what did that mean to us? How did we reorganize our lives? And how did care go beyond simply the care for young children? Because being at home to care was not necessarily the same as caring for a young child when you're the full-time, there's a lot of hands-on stay-at-home dad stuff, or part-time dad, stay-at-home dad stuff, but also lots of other care that we did at home because our grandparents might have also been living with us, or our parents, or et cetera, et cetera. So we want to look at that. And then the meaning of that care to men. Did we as men change as we do more of that care work? Our first glance at that in the midst of COVID, like I think we carried out that survey kind of 9 months into it. Men reported in the countries that we did 6 countries at that time, men reported that they were happier with that additional time, and found kind of life felt somewhat better in the midst of all that was going on. Lots of men also said that it was a respite for them in this moment of insecurity, upset about how your government was dealing with it, depending on where you lived. That caring for their kids was like, was a cool, drug in the positive sense of the word of helping them do better. So we want to know, did that continue? Women, when we asked the same question, said, oh my God, I have no time to myself now. I'm stressed and I'm more depressed. So again, these are averages. People have, but those overall trends held up in multiple countries. So those are something we want to look at, kind of what's happened since, what various kinds of care, and post-COVID, how have we, and I liked your comment around, have we sort of stepped back into the old bad normal, or have we stepped into something, or have some of us figured out ways to step into, oh yeah, that was I don't want to go back to that, and this is the new way, I'm in it.
Gary, this has been wonderful having you on today. I always like to end on a positive note. So, low-hanging fruit. Are there things that either we as individual men could do to be better fathers, partners, and friends, or, turn it on the other way? Are there things that companies and managers could do to help men be better, fathers, partners, and friends? The low-hanging fruit category here, just quick fixes.
Yeah, what are the quick fixes? I mean, one is, employers, look at your policies, make it not just the policy, but encourage it. I hear a lot of workers say, if I see the CEO do it, I see my manager do it, the kind of leading by example.
Setting that example.
Yeah. More of that, I think, is definitely there. And the narrative shift part as well. I mean, it's what you do. And then it's also, let's send our messages to Hollywood and the rest of, like, show more competent, emotionally connected dads, like hold up the this is us's, and, just like, can we as men affirm, we loved seeing, Randall Pearson and Jack Pearson, and we loved having a moment of crying about, just the joys and the challenges of being fathers and caregivers for an adult parent who has Alzheimer's and all that means. So kind of, creating the emotional safe space. I think we can do that on TV and such, but I think the kind of storytelling you do, I think sharing that as men, because we all have those stories, but just being willing to, kind of at the bar, maybe we are watching the finals of, the Wimbledon about to come up, but can we also, when there's the 14th commercial, can we say, how's it going for you? So like, talk to other men, right? I think just talking to other men about this is an amazing piece as well. And then just, I think it goes a huge way when we as men kind of figure out, like, the emotional language on this. Maybe that's not the low-hanging fruit, but how to speak with our partners on doing this better. Kind of an acknowledgement, a bit of humility in it, kind of finding a language of dialogue with our partner. And again, I say that with all humility of, like, probably being better at saying that than in doing it, but feeling like it's like the one thing in my relationship that will work if I go, how have I been doing on that? What could I do better? As much as those words may be kind of, drawn out of my mouth with my own forceps in hand, just how urgent those are for me to say that in my own relationship.
Yeah. Gary Barker, CEO and founder of Equimundo and founder of MenCare. Thank you very much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Paul, and thanks for what you're doing with this.